Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Hi, welcome to Fairy Tale Access. I'm really excited to introduce you to author Donna Armour with her book Solo in Salento. Anyway, it's one of those memoirs that you're going to love because it's not one of those memoirs that you've read before. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Denise Marie.
Oh, my pleasure. This was like a crazy journey with your best friend. I love the tour of Italy, the whole premise for going. So let's start with how you drafted this book, because in the book, it's almost like you're taking us to the journey of the changes that you made to what this story was actually going to be about.
The book, it was never meant to be a book. It was a private journal that I shared with a few people during my stay there. They were also petrified about me going alone. So I said, okay, I'll send a few emails out. I'll take some photographs. You'll all know I'm okay. And so, and when I went, as people discover in the book, I'm the kind of person that because I lied about writing a book, I figured I had to write a book. So when I got back home, I was going to write a book of Pantaleone and the Mosaic Floor, or perhaps Idrusa and the Massacre. And I started, and I have those two manuscripts kind of hanging out somewhere, but it just didn't feel right. And a dear friend of mine said to me, you know, we all want to hear the full story about your trip. Write that book. And so from those journals and sketches and notebooks I had, that's how Solo in Salento evolved.
Take us through how you planned this. You lied to everybody about why you were going, technically, but not really.
Right.
And how did you convince your husband to let you go away for, was it over a month?
It was over a month, yes. In the book, I talk about our marriage and how when we met and married each other, we were both two totally independent people. And so in order to maintain that independence, I created that marriage contract that only lasted a year at a time. So he had some notion that I wasn't run of the mill when I tried to do things. Now, but he's a very traditional man at the same time. And it wasn't that he minded so much as it was more hurtful when family members and friends would say to him, "You're letting her go? I wouldn't let my wife go." And so he felt so strongly about our relationship that he finally said, she does what she wants to do. And we understand each other and we accept that about each other. So I went sailing off or flying off to Italy. And he did. Now, the first part of the trip, because we were gone 2 months, the first part of the trip, he went with me because he wanted to make sure that apartment was safe. And so we were together and we had a great time the first month before I landed in Salento, in Otranto.
Beautiful. And how was it? Okay, so first, I love how you depicted the independent woman that a lot of us are, where we will travel alone. And I love how you depicted the men that support that and that it was okay. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people don't understand that woman.
Right.
Now let's get into the details. So I love that you stayed at this amazing apartment. It was wicked colorful, but you stayed right next door to a castle.
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, the interesting thing about the castle, it's depicted in the first Gothic novel by, I think his last name is Walpole, like in the 1800s, and he has a book called The Castle of Otranto. And I had, in all the reading I do, I had just come across it at some point in my life. And then as I began to look at Otranto and staying there, this castle began to take on a huge significance. The fact that it was the fortress during the massacre. And then to discover it was my next door neighbor, which I didn't really know till after I climbed to that top terrace and I looked over, and there's that huge banner with Andy Warhol exhibit and Marilyn Monroe's picture on the banner. So, but I had been in the castle in a prior trip, and I'd seen a lot of the exhibits. The problem was it closed that same weekend I arrived. It closed for the season. So I never was able to get back inside the entire trip. But the castle really made up that whole walled city. And it was sort of the rendezvous point for whomever I was going to meet, or if you needed to do something or find something, that was your starting point.
And which character from history did you most relate with while you were in Italy, and why her? Why did she follow you around everywhere you went?
I related to Idrusa, and she was a character in a book that I had read some time ago also, and it was about the massacre. And she was the only female character in that book, and she didn't play a huge role, but she was such a carefree spirit. And for those times, you think about 1480, and you think about how women were nothing but property, or even less at that point in history. And the author gave her such a lovely warrior woman spirit. And so in my mind, when I saw that statue of at the very first time of that woman looking out over the sea, and she was so fierce and so protective of that town. And I thought, they could have put a man up there, but they didn't, because there were 5 other characters, and the other 4 were men, and they were military men or fishermen or something. But she, a female, was depicted as that person who was now protecting this harbor and this village. And she became my nemesis. She became part of me. She became who I truly am.
I can see that. And then they have the other side. So you spoke a little bit of Italian, and then there's this whole love affair going on with food. Like, there's so much food in this story.
Well, both my husband and I love to cook. And we owned a restaurant in Georgia. Mm-hmm. We owned a restaurant and a catering service and a bed and breakfast. And in all our travel, well, starting from the first time we met, we have this wonderful story, is that I think it was their second or third date. He invited me over to his house and he fixed a meal. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was dating, I was used to guys, if they invited you for dinner, you got maybe a steak or a hamburger on the grill, and they expected you to toss the salad and put the potatoes in the oven. Ray had created this divine gourmet meal. And I thought to myself, I will not tell him anytime soon that I know how to cook. So for 6 months, I never mentioned anything about that I love to cook. I just enjoyed meal after meal at his house. And the thing he loved about me is, from that first meal, I said to him, this is so good, I want seconds. Well, he didn't have seconds. So he was like, but he said to himself, I like this. I'm so used to picky women, and this is a woman who loves to eat. She enjoys food. She takes great pleasure in the visual aspects of it, the odors, the smells, the aromatics, everything about it. So he had to go away for a couple of weeks. And when we were chatting, I said to him, when you come back, I'll have you over for dinner. Well, he actually was mad because I cooked this real fancy meal for him. And he says, all this time you could cook and you've let me do every meal. And I said, well, it was such a wonderful treat. So from that point on, so much of what we did, our travels, we went to Mexico on our honeymoon, but our first trip to Europe together was Paris. Well, that's a food paradise. And so everywhere we went, we would take cooking lessons, or we'd find someone local to teach us something really fabulous that you just couldn't find. We knew we couldn't find when we came back to the States. So, and then we began to do fundraising events with their meals. And everybody kept saying, you guys need to get a restaurant. And eventually, that's what we did. We opened a restaurant.
Go ahead.
That just the food just goes on and on with us, even now. I mean, we cook.
Well, I thought it was fantastic the way that you weave the relationships that were built over food, over a great cup of coffee, the way things happen when you're traveling. And that was the really good theme throughout that really keeps readers tuned in on this journey. Because, sometimes memoirs can be dry, but it's not at all. It's like an adventure. It's a little bit of a travel book and, looking at things differently and resetting boundaries, being able to be present in a place at that moment in time and become a part of the community, and that gift of inclusion that comes with it. That is such a central theme that you have throughout. And I think it empowers other people, and women or men, to be able to, I can do that trip. She did it. She made it. And she spoke a little Italian.
Yeah, very little.
Very little.
I speak a lot more now, I can tell you, after that trip.
Wow. So what about the whole trash scene? Because in Italy, I guess they started recycling way before us, and they were really detailed about it.
Yes. I laugh a lot because that was such a traumatic experience. And yet, when we went to Sicily, they had 5 different colored trash cans and 5 different kinds of trash you had to put in there. So if I had known that, or if I'd had 5, I may not have survived. But 3 and not being the right color was hilarious. It was just one of those comedy of error things that, is such a simple task and you never think about it. Why would you? And it became this all-consuming part of my life. And I felt like a little kid in first grade getting my first star the first time that I passed muster with the trash. It was like, oh, yay, wow, I'm okay. So, and it was such a metaphor for my life, which, the simplest things, just like the mosaics and the trash, they're such simple, everyday things. And you don't have to search very far to find those things, to examine yourself and to say, my life is fragmented. But if you take the fragments and you put them back together, they're stronger. They become this really strong whole. Or if you take your personal trash and you sort through it, you find some things that you shouldn't discard, or you find some things that maybe someone else could use, but you find a whole lot that you can throw out. So it just became, and it wasn't even like, oh, aha, it was just like, it became who I was. It became my story. So
it was so hysterical. I loved the older lady downstairs that was like, what is she doing? And then I loved when you both came together after the strike of the garbage men, which was like a horrifying experience for the town. And then they come back to work and you're all standing out there. And you came together. It was so funny. It reminded me of moving to New Hampshire. Another little bit of a culture shock, because doing your lawns, if you didn't do your lawn in enough time, your neighbors would do only your front lawn for you. And be like, oh, I've got to get on schedule.
We had the same experience the one time we moved up north to Ohio, and they would come and shovel the front bit of their sidewalk because we didn't have a snow shovel. So yeah, it's those moments, those small moments that you begin to say, oh my.
Exactly. And you had so many of them in the book, and the different characters that you met along the way, and how they influenced you positively and negatively, but how you learned to get along with them, especially that couple that we seem to always meet. But I'll meet you tomorrow. I'm writing,
Yes, they were a unexpected challenge. Again, like life, we always get in these situations, sometimes unavoidable, sometimes not, but that you're confronted with people, places, situations that are just like, why is this going on? And what am I supposed to learn? That's finally the question I learned to ask myself. What am I supposed to learn? And once I said that, then it began to work for me. And they became wonderful characters for my book.
They did. And, you were able to take the positiveness, although they are people that are typically hard to get along with, that are very pushy and can be overbearing. But, wearing flip-flops in a cobblestone city, but just the fact that you found out, okay, so in the midst of these crazy things that they do that make absolutely no sense, they were really good sports,
Yes.
and they learned themselves to respect boundaries and not step
Yes.
over it. It was great. I love the train trip too.
It was so interesting when the first time I showed my manuscript to a developmental editor, and she wanted me to remove everything about Bobby and Priscilla, and also about the last part of the trip when I was traveling home and it was so horrendous. And she said, oh, those are such negative aspects. I said, but that's what our lives are about. You have positive and you have negative, light and darkness. It's just the way life is. And I said, I don't want to sanitize it, because traveling is not a fairy tale as much as we'd like for it to be. When I'm at my destination, yes, it can be. But the transportation part of travel is horrible. And you encounter people along the way that can be less than what you expect, or even attractions or food or anything. There can always be these things. So it's always how you look at them, what you see, how you can turn that into something that works for you.
Definitely. Like the train trip or different things that didn't go as planned,
Yeah. Yes.
You have to,
Yeah.
That's the way travel is. So you have to find those positives. And you are so good about delivering them in such a soft way that it just flowed with the story.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
But it's such a good reminder to people that, when you travel, you expect delays, expect that things don't go well, and then roll with the punches. And then I think when you come home, which is why I really hope COVID goes away fast. But when you come home, you're refreshed, you're rejuvenated. You can deal with all types of people.
Yes. Yes. And that's when we made the really huge decision, because we're not into moving. Ray and I have lived all over the place, and we've traveled all over the place, and we were looking for that final place to stay. And so that was a tough decision, but it was the right decision for us to leave Columbia, South Carolina, and move to Beaufort. And Beaufort is where the book was really born, because the community here is full of authors and artists and craftspeople, and it's just a very community-minded town. And it was just meant to be here. And when I arrived, I immediately found a writing group. That writing group has stuck with me from beginning to end. They heard the first chapter I wrote was The Last Supper. Can you believe that? And I think it's chapter, 44 or 45 now.
Yeah.
That was the first piece I wrote. And took it to the group. That was my very first reading to be critiqued. And they said to me, that writing group said, you need to write a book. So that's what I did.
And you did a great job. This is your first book ever, right?
Yes. I've read, I've done magazine articles on travel and other things, but it's the first book that I felt so strongly about the message that I was willing to go out on a limb to find a publisher, to put myself out there, because I'm not a public speaker. Like to be alone, so the virus hasn't really impacted me too much, because I like to hold up and be with my own thoughts. And I'm working on my second book. So
well, see, that's even another thing. This spring book brought you totally, in more ways than one. I think the final writing of the book and the adventure of the whole trip itself really brought you out of your element.
Yes, it did. You're so right.
But I love the story. It was such a joy to just be able to go along and find out where you're going to go next, what piece of history I'm going to uncover. Was it going to be sung to you? Was it going to be told to you? And, as if they were acting in a play. And it just all the highs and lows of it. It was really entertaining. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
So
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the author that had the most impact on me probably was Pat Conroy. And for me to end up where Pat lived was kind of an amazing experience. And the thing that struck me, and I love to read, and I've read hundreds of books like we all have. And when I first picked up his book, I didn't hear words. I heard music. And I thought, oh my, if I could just write even the smallest bit like this person writes, that would give me such personal joy. So I was lucky to meet him on several occasions, and I'm a docent at the Pat Conroy Literary Center now. So a lot of dreams have come through for me by moving to Beaufort.
Was he one of the people that encouraged you to write the book?
He did not, because, we didn't have that kind of relationship. If he had lived, I feel certain he would have, because that would have happened eventually. But most of my meetings with him were, short, getting him to sign my books or just chatting at a reception or something, not anything. And, you even though in my mind I was going to write a book and I wanted to, it was like, oh, I'm in awe of this great, great character. So I'm not going to say anything. But he has helped so many people, so many authors write, that to me, I know that he would have if he had known. So.
Yeah, I think he would have been impressed with the way that you give raw information, the way that you felt, the way that things happen, the same way that he was completely open about the relationships he had growing up. I think you did that part well. I think you could definitely compete with him on explaining food. The food was so good. I wanted to go to Italy just to eat.
Yes, and you should go just to eat. It's a romance that I have with Italy, is the food and the wine, and the walking through the village and the aromas. It just, by the time you got to the restaurant, you could just feel it was leading you there.
Well, that and just the markets and,
Hmm.
the wines that, weren't available to buy anywhere that they had from their local
Yes,
sources.
yes, 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 yes.
Yes, you don't
Uh,
realize how much you gave us. You gave us
well,
so
thank you.
much. It was so much fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, my second book is called La Stella Rossa del Mare, which is the red starfish. And I made references to the starfish necklace in the book.
Hmm.
And so, but it's going to be a mystery. And it will also be set in Puglia, and there will be lots of food.
Oh, good. I can't wait till that comes out. When will that come out?
I don't know. I'm just working on the first draft. So I've got to send it off to a couple of, people to look at, and we'll see how it goes. I hope within the year. This stuff, the publishing end of this business and all, for all new authors who may listen to this, you really need to be prepared to um, settle in and and work through it, because it's another new experience. If you're not familiar with the business at all. So I've had to learn so much, like this technology, it's like, oh no. So,
Well, how do you take negative feedback from an editor or a publisher?
um, I've experienced so much in my life. I don't view it as negative. I view it as another person's perception of my work. And if it seems to be good, which the editor, I'm with Cola Books, the head editor at Cola Books was excellent. And he simply said to me, you have got some great stories. I want to move them around. And here's where I think this should go. It was perfect. He had that sense of timing and all that. But if someone had just said to me negatively, I don't like that character, I don't like how you address that situation, something, I take that with a big grain of salt. It just is what it is. And if I can improve that character or situation, I certainly will look at it, and it's a possibility. But that hasn't been uncomfortable at all. I think I'm too of a certain age where, life is what it is. And
Oh,
just
that's great. Well, I don't see what they would have to complain about. It was a fantastic read. And thank you so much for sharing so much about how you achieved it.
thank you so much for having me, Denise Marie. It's been a wonderful experience.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Until next time, keep asking questions. And if you need a great escape, Solo and Cilantro is definitely the place to go for it. We'll see you soon.